Organising this Sunday was proving difficult. And I was praying that God would kind of sort things out for me. And so it was, please God, provide me with a speaker. Please God, if that's not on, please God, direct me to some kind of video online by somebody that I know is reliable and trustworthy and will speak for no longer than a kind of 15 minutes or so. And if not, then please give me some thoughts, some ideas about what this Sunday should be about. And nothing seemed to be happening. And it wasn't until Tuesday of this week that I felt prompted to watch some sermons online by an individual whom I respect. I had no idea what he was going to be talking about, but when I logged on, I found that he was actually running a series of 4 sermons for the month of July. So there was a nice kind of slot there, 4 consecutive sermons on the same subject. And as I watched those, I felt moved by some of the things he was saying to share some of my own thoughts about the future of Meadow Way. So if you like, God ended up having me. And isn't that often the case when we're praying about something? Please God, do this, this, this. And sometimes God turns that round and you ask the solution, not somebody else. I believe that handing over Meadowway Chapel to Gateway Vineyard is in God's plan. And is a result of our prayers over a long period of time. Those private prayers at home. Those prayers on Tuesday mornings pre-pandemic. The prayers of leaders and others here. But again, nothing seemed to be happening until November of last year, when an unexpected email arrived. It wasn't unexpected as far as God was concerned, of course, but it certainly was unexpected as far as we were concerned. And that began the process which has brought us to where we are today. And God has provided us with a door of opportunity. We stand on the threshold of a new beginning. And these words came into my mind. Jesus saying, I will build my church, and the powers of hell cannot conquer it. God will build his future church here if we are prepared to do what he says and follow where he leads. Jesus said, the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. Luke 19 verse 10. Now most of us get that in terms of salvation. But I believe the coming of Jesus into the world is more than an evacuation plan to get us from this world to the next. Because the full meaning of that word saved in the original language in which the Bible was written means wholeness. Making people whole, not just solving the sin problem. Jesus talked about a quality of life in the here and now. In John 10:10 he says, my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. In the book of Acts we see a community of people that loved God, but also loved and cared for each other. And that community grew significantly. So it's about, not just about salvation, it's about a wholeness of life experience as well. And I believe God is challenging us to build relationships with those who live around us, to help heal our broken hearts, to comfort those who are sad or mourning, to provide for those who don't have, to be a light in the darkness of this world, to show love and concern, and ultimately to introduce them to Jesus. That is a huge challenge. I have lived a lot of my adult life inside what I might describe as a religious bubble. And on reflection, too much of the time, it was also inward looking. So I have not seen as many lives impacted by the love of God as I would like to have seen. And I have not seen people's lives being transformed by meeting with Jesus as I would like to have seen. But I'm not the only one inhabiting this bubble. I've also learned how difficult it is to change the culture and approach of a church which has been in existence for years. And starting afresh with Gateway Vineyard gives us a much better opportunity to change our emphasis and our culture. We need to burst this religious bubble and give greater attention to those who don't know Jesus. How will we deal with the issues in society without appearing judgmental? Those things like lack of respect, exploitation of others, poverty, abuse, sexuality, complicated family situations. How will we deal with those things? Only with God's help. A young couple moved into a new house. And the next morning at breakfast, the young woman looked out of the window and saw the neighbours washing on the line. She turned to her husband and said, "That isn't very clean, is it?" He said nothing, as husbands do sometimes. And this kind of repeated itself every morning for a while, whilst the neighbour had got the washing on the line. Until one morning arrived and the young woman was surprised to see a nice clean wash on the line. And she said to her husband, "Look, our neighbour has finally learned how to do it properly." The husband replied, "I got up early this morning and cleaned our windows." And so it is with life. What we see when watching others depends on the clarity of the window through which we look. Jesus told a story about two men who went up to the temple to pray. One, a religious leader who was doing his best to keep all the 600 plus more rules created by his predecessors. The other man was employed by the Roman authorities and despised by his fellow countrymen because of that. The religious leader, who didn't know anything about the other guy there, made a judgment about who would meet with God's favour. He was the one keeping the rules. He says, "I thank you, God, that I am not like everyone else." The other man humbly sought God's forgiveness, and he was the one accepted by God. Let's not fall into the trap of making quick judgments about other people, particularly those with little or no faith. I want to tell you about Tom. Tom was a man with a drink problem. Tom, who was known in the locality because he had a drink problem. Tom lived within a short distance of the local church. And one Sunday, Tom turned up at church, smelling of alcohol strongly. He sat right at the back, as far away as it was possible to be. Tom came back on other Sundays. Sometimes he didn't make the start of the service. Sometimes he didn't arrive until after the service was finished. But he had his cup of coffee or his cup of tea. And gradually, relationships were built between Tom and some of the people in that church. To the extent that some people from the church were able to visit Tom in his home, to meet his wife, to meet his young son, and to share something of Jesus within that family. Now, I don't know whether Tom and his wife ever came to faith, but what I do know is Jesus was shared with them. I know that because what I've just told you happened in the church that I was worshipping at the time. Don't judge people quickly. All of us are influenced by life's experiences, aren't we? I want to share a few thoughts about my dad. I went to Sunday school from as long as I can remember. With my brother, Dad always made sure that we went to Sunday school. But the home we grew up in, whilst it was a good home, was not a Christian home. There was nothing overtly Christian that was done in the home. But Dad always wanted us, or made us go to Sunday school. And I found faith in my teenage years, but because of the home situation, Jesus was never mentioned, and God was never mentioned. And that went on for a lot of years. Until, I think, because I'm trying to remember, and I'm not entirely sure of the complete sequence of events, I may get them in a bit of a wrong order, but Dad was diagnosed with throat cancer. He had some surgery, he had some treatment, he came through that, and that seemed to be somehow a turning point in his life. I was diagnosed with cancer in 1990. And at that point, it's like a window opened. Because in the conversations that were happening within the family, my dad said to me, "Son, I am praying for you." Wow! Wow! Son, I am praying for you. And then later in life, when Dad was in his 90s, we had to attend the hospital and be told that he was terminally ill. And I still remember sitting in the car, in the hospital car park, after we came out of that meeting with the consultant, and Dad turning to me and saying, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory?" My dad, who in earlier years we wouldn't even mention the name of Jesus in the house. And I learned some things about my dad, which I never knew. First of all, he came to faith as a teenager at Surrey Chapel, as a young man at Surrey Chapel. He gave his testimony on the Haymarket in front of whoever was there. He went into the army because of World War II, and he knelt in his barracks and prayed in front of his fellow soldiers. So what happened? This young man who was fired up for God, what happened? And he told me, eventually, God, he said, took from me the only 3 women I ever loved. His mum, who died with breast cancer, his sister, who died at a comparatively young age of kidney failure, and his wife, my mum. And that just knocked him. You know, this God that I believe in has allowed these things to happen to me. I can't handle that. And so he walked away from it all. But he came back, you see. He left God, if you like, but God never left him. And once he turned the corner, once he was back in relationship with God, he used to come whenever he could, and when I was preaching, he would turn up. And when we knew that he was terminally ill, and he asked me if I would take his funeral, and he said, "Richard, I want you to speak on John chapter 3, verse 16. Tell the folks about the saving power of Jesus." We are all influenced by life's experiences, aren't we? And we need to be prepared to listen to the life stories of people in our community, to empathise with them, and to better understand what life has done to them. We need to meet them where they are and journey with them, displaying compassion at every step. That's rather more than just encouraging them to come to church on a Sunday. That is another real challenge, because walking with people who have suffered because of life circumstances takes time, and it takes commitment. And if we fill our church calendar with too many activities, the result will be there'll be less time to walk with these people. God's church, that is the born-again community of people, not building, is the hope for the world. And there is no plan B. And as I was thinking about what I was going to share with you this morning, I remembered something I had read several years ago about the church in a book written by a pastor of 30 plus years experience. And it was the story of Emily. Emily was born severely damaged, with only a few weeks to live. Brought to the front at the end of a service to be prayed for. And the pastor struggled, but did the best he could. And then he said, "Is there anything further we can do for you as a church?" And the father responded, "We are part of a small group within this church." They knew this pregnancy had complications. They were at our house the night we learned the news. They were at the hospital when Emily was born. They cleaned our house and fixed our meals. They prayed for us constantly. They called us regularly. They are even helping us plan Emily's funeral. And then the pastor wrote in this book, "This is a situation I shall never forget. A group of loving people doing their best to soften one of the cruelest blows in life." I wondered where that family would be and how they would handle that heartbreak without the church. And then he further wrote, "There is nothing like the local church when it's working right. It comforts the grieving. and heals the broken. It builds bridges to seekers and offers truth to the confused. It provides for those in need. It opens its arms to the forgotten, the downtrodden, and the disillusioned. It frees the oppressed and offers belonging to the marginalised. That kind of church cannot be achieved nor sustained unless God is at the very heart of it. He will give such a church wisdom and the direction it needs, and he will rightly be credited with the glory when spiritual fruit is evident. I believe it is possible, by handing over Medway Chapel to Gateway Vineyard under God's guidance and protection, to see such a church being built here. That is my vision. That is the desire of my heart. And folks, I get excited about that. I just wish I was a few years younger, so that I could put more into the future than perhaps I can now, because as my great-granddaughter says, "Grandad, you are old." Each of us need to decide if we want to be part of such a church. If your answer is yes, then we start a journey of adventure together, bathed in prayer, in expectation that God will work in ways which we have not seen in a while. But it means that we clearly have unfinished business. Because some of you are my generation, you may well remember a hymn from long back. It was written in 1930, and it is facing a task unfinished that drives us to our knees. As an aside, look, when we come to church music, it's not about whether it's modern or ancient. I like both. It's about what messages are conveyed. And this is a message which I think is relevant to us in our situation. The first verse says this: facing a task unfinished that drives us to our knees. A need that undiminished rebukes our slothful ease. We, who rejoice to know thee, renew before thy throne the solemn pledge we owe thee, to go and make thee known. Will you pledge to make Jesus known in this area and be active in the future church here? That is the unfinished task before us.